Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Could lake monsters originate from deep within the earth? How could unknown giant creatures remain undetected in 2022? What is the orang pendek?
Hello, and welcome to the 955th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WON AM and FM radio here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that zoo full of questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and Dad, Paul. And today we welcome back, well, we don't, but we would have the Indiana Jones of cryptozoology.
All right, I will explain that statement by Ben. Our guest today, Richard Freeman, is the sort of Indiana Jones of the paranormal. And he was a headliner in our our book from 2017, Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard Of. We have been unable to reach Richard for the last week. We hope he's okay. However, he travels all the time on his quests for strange creatures, and given the state of air travel today, and we understand, we're told that it's the same all over the world now. Everything is a mess. Flights are canceled right and left, and he may very well be marooned in some exotic location somewhere. However, and we will give you an update if we can reach him today. If not, we are prepared to wing it with his work and talk about his work. And we do invite your calls today, 401-766-1240 from anywhere. Or you can write Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com or Ben at BehindTheParanormal.com. So, as I say, Richard is he's a British researcher from Devon in England, and he is one of the headliners in our book, and it says, Richard Freeman is an adventurer and trained zoologist specializing in cryptids, which he travels all over the world to investigate. He's also an author, zoological journalist, and media personality. Zoological director of the UK-based Centre for Fortean Zoology, or the CFZ. Richard co-edits both Journal, Animals and Men, and the annual CFZ yearbook. Richard has authored or co-authored a number of books, and has contributed to Fortean and Zoological magazines. Anybody doesn't know what Fortean is, that's for Charles Fort, early 20th century researcher of the weird, who spent a lot of his time in the British Museum looking for weird stuff that happened around the world in the news, and he found lots of it, wrote a bunch of books, so he is immortalized with the term Fortean. There's even a magazine, the Fortean Times, which is really, really at the forefront of, I suppose, paranormal journalism. So anyway, Richard also lectures widely. Richard appeared on the CBS radio edition of Behind the Paranormal on January 22nd, 2012, and he's made several appearances with us here at WON since then. Richard first developed his passion for cryptozoology in the 1970s by watching Doctor Who. Who can that be? No, I'm sorry. His interest in the unexplained and zoology grew in tandem. He became a zookeeper at Twycross Zoo in Leicestershire, England, working with more than 400 exotic species. I don't know there were that many. From ants to elephants, but with a special interest in crocodilians. His website is cfz.org.uk. Yeah, he was really interested in crocodiles. And Doctor Who, so crocodiles and Doctor Who.
Oh, I mean, those two things go hand in paw.
So, yeah, exactly. So we have, I've recently been rereading he has a 2-volume set of books here, Adventures in Cryptozoology, and the second volume is In Search of Real Monsters, which was supposed to be the title of our show today, because he's working on a new book along the same lines. And next month he is headed to Sumatra, to research and try and find the orang pendek.
Ah.
All right. Now, we have that in the book here, and we will go through that a little bit as we attempt to contact him again at some point. And he talked about, for the sake of our book, and as a matter of fact, the Behind the Paranormal series of books is based on interviews we've done on the show over the last 14 or 15 years. And we interviewed Richard on a number of occasions. And our next book will be about UFOs. That's coming next year, Behind the Paranormal 3 Uneasy Skies. But in the meantime, we'll concentrate on this one. So in our book, Richard talks about the nasty Almasty. All right. Now, globe-trotting cryptozoologist Richard Freeman is convinced that he and a colleague came very close to an encounter with the Almasty, which is a Russian version of Sasquatch, in the Caucasus Mountains in 2008. And Richard told us, quote, "It was 2:30 in the morning, and we were at an old farmhouse. The house had an L-shaped veranda. Suddenly, we heard a deep guttural vocalization. Something was moving on two legs on that veranda. We ran toward it with our cameras, but it had disappeared into the night." Now, would you run toward a 600-pound hominid in the middle of the night?
Well, to be fair, we do know people who have done that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'd run toward it. I mean, I was...
leisurely walk, perhaps?
Yeah, amble casually. In my encounter in September 2016 in Pennsylvania, I attempted to get out of the truck, but it was scared away by your mother calling me on the cell phone in the middle of the night. And I said, it was no time for a chatty conversation.
Yeah.
So I never had the close encounter, but there it was. I saw it with my own eyes. So anyway, so here's this thing on this veranda, according to Richard here. And I said, we ran toward it with our cameras, but it had disappeared into the night. With a height of 5 to 6 feet, very human-looking and slightly ape-like, the Almasty is similar to the Yeti or the Bigfoot or the Sasquatch we know about. But it has shorter arms, according to Richard. Richard said he has less hair, black or brown, as does the Yeti, on the face and body that the other hominids have. It feeds on berries. I don't know if I'd trust that. Humongous primate just eating just berries. Sometimes it attacks sheep. Oh, there you go. But it eats only their livers. What's that about?
Well, there are a lot of proteins and such in the livers.
Well, how's an Almasty going to know that?
Well, you know what? That's a good question. It probably doesn't, but if you want to make the argument from a zoological standpoint, perhaps over time it just started choosing that because it ended up being healthier. I don't know. I'm not a zoologist. It's like why do certain animals do certain things at certain times? It's like we don't really know. They just kind of do it. Maybe it's instinct.
Well, we've seen that with known animals because I know this is a terrible idea, but we at the old homestead we feed the cat, any neighborhood cat that comes along, right out the window in the basement, right?
Like a drive-through.
Yeah, pretty much. And then they come and they look in the window. It's like kitty TV. They watch us. You see them, you grew up there.
I do, yeah.
Looking in the window. Anyway, but at night, all their little friends come along, and some are not so little. Raccoons, possums, Shoshana the skunk, Woonsocket Willie, the groundhog, they all come along. And I put a trail cam out there one time, and it was absolutely amazing. And Shoshana the skunk is rolling the kitty can down the sidewalk like it was a circus act or something. So one can imagine the Almasty, I haven't got one of those on our webcam, on our trail cam. However, they are nocturnal, and as Richard says here, being a nocturnal creature, it's very difficult to catch a glimpse of this elusive hominid. In some cases, people have attempted to shoot the creature. These individuals reportedly died afterwards under mysterious circumstances. Now that makes you wonder. Anyway, and then we get into the matter of what are the nature of these cryptids. And one of the questions we opened the show was, how could these things remain undetected in 2022? Well, we think we're such hotshots. There are large areas of the Earth that have have still not been explored.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, why haven't these, especially the big ones, been positively seen or identified?
Well, it's I mean, it's not just a theory to say, well, you know, most of the Earth is uninhabited. It's a fact. In my time in college, I made the grand decision of taking a sociology course. And in that, I remember our professor was saying to the effect that, you know, overpopulation is effectively a myth, because I think, I'm trying to remember the exact statistic. I'd have to look it up because I don't want to just make it up. There's a good portion of the Earth that's just like not habitable for humans. Humans tend to congregate around rivers. You know, and that's and you could argue that highways are kind of the modern day rivers in some senses. So you'll see that there's more sort of built up around where highways intersect. You know, a good example in our own listening area here in Woonsocket, you know, Eddie Dowling Highway, right? So you see it's built up right where it connects with 146, and you know, you tend to see, you know, where there's you know, Route 7, great example, right off of 295. There's a whole bunch built up off of there. So you'll see where these intersections of roads are, there's more stuff built up, whether it's living conditions, stuff like that. You'll probably see it more nowadays with these big multi-unit, you know, apartment complexes going up. Well, what does this have to do with anything? So the reason this is important is because, you know, we don't really move anywhere else. We tend to stay in certain areas. So there's a good portion of stuff that's just either not explored, not well mapped, and Maine is a great example. You know, you don't have to say, well, you know, the Antarctic, you know, Maine, right? 75% of Maine is national forest. So it's like everybody just kind of lives on the coast, and there's maybe a few towns inland, but a majority of it's just national forest that's like pretty wild.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, you hear like all these stories of just, you know, all sorts of weird stuff happening in the woods there, right? Like the Allagash guys.
Yeah.
And
the alien abduction experience, we've had them on the air.
Yeah, so just stuff like that. You know, it's this idea, and it's nothing new in human history, that on the outside of civilization, because civilization only exists in small portions, there are monsters, there are things that are unknown, and they exist on the fringes of society. And this is the fringes of society, right? You know, the Ural Mountains are not exactly well populated.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's not just a mythological thing. This is like a practical thing. So I mean, you know, there's a lot of little things at play here throughout human history.
But you're right about Maine. I love Maine. That's where men live. Men live in Maine.
Yes, you can't get there from here.
You can
from
try.
Maine.
So this leads into Richard's comments in our book about not only what is Bigfoot, but where do these things come from and go to? Because we talked many times about our experiences in Pennsylvania, and it's a rural area, but it's not a wilderness area in the triangle out there. And when we have our neighborhood meetings, there's some opinion by the local people that maybe there are some caves, and the Sasquatch would live in these caves, and they sort of come out to find food, you know, at odd times of the day. But I don't think that's good enough. There are too many people around there. So anyway, finally we come to the question, and there are almost as many answers as there are experiences. Is Bigfoot a shapeshifter, multiversal creature, flesh and blood mammal, alien, being, dumb animal, or brilliant physicist, a survival of the supposedly extinct but proven to have existed Gigantopithecus, civilized or not, friend or foe, all of the above or none of the above? It sometimes seems that the more research we do, the further we get from an answer. And in the words of Richard Freeman, quote, Soviet scientists speculated that the Chuchina, or the Siberian Snowman, represents the last surviving remnant of the Siberian Paleoasiatic Aborigines who retreated to the upper reaches of the Yana River and in Digurka rivers. Aboriginal people believed they came from different worlds or from or are shapeshifters. I believe the vast majority are flesh and blood animals. Now, Richard tends to be very feet on the ground, painstaking researcher, but he's not too hot on the idea of multiversal creatures, you know, them coming and going from parallel realities as we speculate, and as many experts we've had on the show, such as Linda Godfrey, speculate that they do. So Richard continues, we have the false notion that the world has been mapped and explored, as Ben said. It has not been. That's true for South America, Africa, Asia, even part of North America. There are parts of the world where you can travel for 1,000 miles and not see another human, unquote. And then I asked him on the show, again, this is a CBS edition from 2012, some people believe that Bigfoot and his cousins are intelligent, even benevolent. What say you, Richard? Richard said, certainly intelligent. You do hear stories of them saving drowning people, etc. Animals do sometimes help each other, unquote. And then the words of researcher Albert Rosales, who was another headliner in our book, Bigfoot, quote, Bigfoot is definitely an intelligent being that has powers far beyond what we're used to and that are perhaps interdimensional. I don't think we'll catch one. So that was the section in the book that highlighted Richard. Now, one of the things I was going to ask him today was based on a lot of the stories in his Volume 1, Adventures in Cryptozoology, Hunting for Yetis, Mongolian Death Worms, and other not-so-mythical monsters. And he hesitates to use the term. Anybody watching the video feed, here's the book, the first, and here's the second one in that series.
Very nicely designed.
I thought so.
Very, very pleasing to look at.
Yes. So you can judge a book by its cover.
You can.
Yeah. So, in any case, he deals a lot with lake monsters, a special interest of Ben since he was a young lad.
I do really like lake monsters.
Yeah. And he always wanted me, when he was little, he always wanted me to take him to Loch Ness so he could, as if the Ness would come up and shake fins with him.
That's true. And I also, for whatever reason, as children just do not understand distance, so I thought it was like, from here to like Fall River was to like get there.
A little bit farther than that. But the whole lake monster thing is a complex issue. There seem to be lots and lots of them. And I was going to ask Richard why there are so many different descriptions of these things. There are a number of kinds of lake monsters identified by one of the pioneers of cryptozoology, and that would be Bernard. I've heard this pronounced several ways: Heuvelmans, Wabelmans, and Heuvelman. I've heard that pronounced as well. He classified 9 different types of sea monster. That's interesting because we classify 9 different types of paranormal parasites. But the number 1 is the long-necked, a long-necked beast with a small head, a large body, and 4 flippers. This is commonly compared with the plesiosaur of dinosaur lore, and you often hear lake monsters and sea monsters, or whatever these creatures are, described in that way. Including the Loch Ness creatures. Number 2 is the Myrrh Horse, an animal with very large eyes, a horse-like face, whiskers, and long hair. The Myrrh Horse is also a vertical undulator. This, too, he thought Wabelmans thought of as a pinniped of some kind. And the undulator, very often, regardless of the descriptions of the heads of these things, people will see them undulating through the water with humps like a snake. Now, Roy Mackle, Dr. Roy Mackle, who investigated the Loch Ness creature some time ago and took the first sonar readings of Loch Ness, suggested that there were a number of creatures there, and that when their backs were above water and they're feeding each other, people would think it's the humps of one creature.
I think it was killer whales, correct? Was that the...
Not Loch Ness.
Or maybe what am I thinking of? I'm thinking of something else.
You're not supposed to call them that anymore, brother.
Oh, right. Yeah, they are now differently named.
Yeah, they're nice whales.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Orcas.
Yes.
All right, so number 3 is the many-humped, an animal with a fairly short neck, a long body, and either a row of humps on the back or a flexible spine that loops up and coils around in the water. This is the classic sea serpent type. Snake-like, and that sort of thing. So there have been suggestions that it could be a survival of the The basilosaurs were some sort of form of whale from prehistoric times. Number 4, the many-finned, a weird beast with a scalloped tail, plated skin, and spines protruding from its sides. Undulates, too. Number 5, the Super Otter, a huge creature of northern latitudes that wears a cape. No, it doesn't say that. Northern latitudes that bore a passing resemblance to an outsized otter. Number 6, the Super Eel, humongous eels. Number 7, the marine saurian, the reptilian monster or dinosaur-like crocodile creature that people report. Number 8, what New Haven calls the father of all turtles, a turtle that dwarfs all known species of its kind. And
they can
finally,
get pretty big.
Yeah, they do. I've seen them in the Blackstone River, if it was a turtle. Number 9, the yellow belly, a huge tadpole-shaped animal. So whether all these things are cryptids or not, Richard would discuss these as probably, at least most of them, as probably unknown animals, stressing that not only is the land unexplored in the earth, but so is the ocean. I remember, good grief, when was this? The very early 1970s, a friend of mine from an oceanographic team was in the Marianas Trench off the coast of the west coast of South America. The Peru-Chile Trench, rather.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Marianas are the other side of the Pacific. And they had a research vessel, and they just, to see what would happen among the other experiments, they lowered a very, very, I believe it was titanium or chrome steel hook, and they baited it way the heck down into the trench, like a couple of miles. Not really expecting too much. They thought maybe they'd catch, one of those weird luminous things that lives at those depths. But in the middle of the night, the whole ship shook, and somebody went out and started the winch, which fortunately had a lot of high-test cable. There was a kind of a fight. The ship was shaking, and they were going to cut the cable when it went slack, and they reeled it in. The cable was straight. The hook was straightened out.
Ooh.
Completely straightened. So whatever had done it, he said, must have weighed like 20 to 30 tons, he thought. And obviously the bait was gone. So there was something down there of tremendous size and tremendous strength. So we just don't know. We know more about Mars. We mapped Mars. We know more about other planets and the moon than we do about our own oceans.
Well, there's also the infamous bloop as well.
Yes.
That's another one that still baffles everybody that Noah in 1997 recorded.
Not Noah from the Ark.
No, Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration.
Right.
Yeah, and I always, that one always fascinated me because there were all these theories that maybe it was like volcanic, and then eventually I think somewhere around like 2012, 2011 it was discovered it had to be organic. Something big made that sound.
Yeah.
But the ocean's so deep that it's like catfish. Catfish are a great example. When they're in the right environment, they can just grow continuously. And
that's right.
And they can carp can they can just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. Some of the biggest catfish in the world, I think they exist in India. And they just hang out there and they just live at the bottom and they just feed off of scraps and stuff, and they can just pretty much grow indefinitely. And so, given the right conditions, anything can really grow to monstrous sizes, pardon the pun.
Well, yeah. Well, I remember when I was in the seminary up in Augsburg, New York, right on the St. Lawrence River, I had a little boat, and I'd go out just to enjoy the northern lights you could see in the winter. And there was at one point, I was out there, and this huge thing swam out of the boat. It was a muskellunge.
Oh, yeah.
Which is related to the sturgeon, I believe, and they have the musky derby every year, and some of those things can be over 20 feet long. Fortunately, they aren't really aggressive, at least not that I ever saw. At least not toward me and my little boat. But so Richard would say that many of these lake monsters that or even in the ocean. The Great New England Sea Serpent, for one. So we did a show with Jeremy Robinson on that.
Yes.
Yeah. Which was actually seen on the shore at one point. Rather snake-like or eel-like, although I don't know about eels getting on the shore and sunning themselves. But Richard would say that many of these things are just very, very large versions of known creatures, or perhaps unknown varieties of known creatures, that sort of thing. So I think that's a very sensible explanation for some. But like what I saw in that field in Pennsylvania was not a big chimp,
right?
Or anything like that. So, however, I think there is room for all explanations. But as far, I didn't realize. I'm yakking. So let's take our mid-show break, and we'll be back with more about the lake monster. It is Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM, New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back, so stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON AM and FM radio, originating from the great city of Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And we are having sort of an interview with our guest without the guest today, Richard Freeman, the Indiana Jones of the cryptozoology world, strange creatures. We have not been able to reach him for over a week, so we hope he's okay. He could be stuck in the maelstrom of airport life, which we are told pretty much all over the world is all messed up. And he always travels to exotic places.
Oh yeah, a friend of mine was just coming back from Scotland, and ironically he was coming back from Scotland, and he was saying that halfway they were just flying over Ireland, and the hydraulics gave out, and so they had to make an emergency landing, and then he spent an extra day in Ireland waiting for a flight, so he had a layover in Ireland and didn't have any of his stuff. He was there for a full 24 hours.
It makes you not want to travel.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. So anyway, getting back to lake monsters, I was going to ask Richard today about some of the varying characteristics of these things. There have been many, particularly in North America. I'm thinking of Ogopogo up Lake Okanagan up in B.C.,
yes,
British Columbia. The natives said that they ate people. They would attack, and if you didn't keep to your feet, you'd be dinner. And there are a number of them that do that. And yet, on the other hand, you've got Loch Ness, and even our own here in New England, Champ, up in Lake Champlain, that are just not known for being aggressive, being rather passive and eating, with a Yogi Berra, eating nuts and berries, or fish or something like that.
It's a vegetarian.
So I was going to ask Richard about that. Not only the varying appearances of these creatures, but why they seem to be benign in some cases and not in others.
Well, it's almost reminiscent of the stories of dragons.
Very, very true. Well, I don't know too many nice dragons.
No. But it's it's interesting because, you have stories of dragons throughout various different cultures, and they kind of died off in Western Europe, but they stuck around in Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, sort of, with their own different versions of it, South America, and North America, really, until the colonials came and kind of ruined everything. Even then, the stories of, I'm trying to remember if it was Ogopogo, where the colonists interacted with it and they had to fight it or something. I might be thinking of a different lake monster.
Yeah, I think you're...
I forget which lake monster I'm thinking of, but they had actual, they were shooting at it.
Yeah.
Just stuff like that, like good colonials. You don't understand what it is, shoot it.
Exactly. Well, that occurred with the New England sea serpent, the great New England sea serpent.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking of.
As Jeremy Robinson.
There we go. I'm getting my sea monsters mixed up.
Yes. Well, there's so many. And up at Gloucester Harbor, that they had seen a bunch of people were in a boat, and there it was sunning itself on the shore. So somebody had the gun, and they naturally started to shoot at it. And it was just well known to have been seen up until the 1920s. So I don't know, either searched for greener pastures or died or whatever.
And I probably get sick of being shot at, I guess.
Well, the other question that arises biologically is, where do these things come from? And you have to have a breeding population in order for them to continue. Loch Ness supposedly has had a monster since, the 13th century, in St. Columba, reporting it. And people still see things like it today. And the lake is very, very long, very, very deep, and supposedly has an outlet to the sea. Well, supposedly it does. So that would explain the longevity and the fact that you've got all these creatures who seem to be seen at all periods in history in the same place. On the other hand, I'm thinking, and this is another thing I was going to ask Richard, the Coyne family, C-O-Y-N-E, there are coins around here, of Irish descent, at Loch Nahuin near Connemara, Ireland in 1968. They came down to the shore of a relatively small loch or lake, excuse me, and they saw a creature with a long neck, but apparently it had no eyes. And it was large, Loch Ness style. And it was swimming around on the surface of the water. And again, the place wasn't that big. And they lived there, so then they'd never seen this before. Sorry. So the question arises, is this creature perhaps from some underground cave system or river system, and then somehow came to the surface? And because it's known that many creatures in caves like that don't have any eyes.
Well, yeah, they don't need them.
They don't need them. There's no light. So could that be the origin of one or more or some of these lake monsters?
Well, I think the sort of the I'm trying to think of the right word. The sort of the thorn that kind of goes unnoticed is the biological reasons. They can get you pretty far. They're like, okay, well, Loch Ness Monster, yeah, you could say it's different things, or perhaps it exists in like a cave system and there's a breeding population in the ocean. Okay, cool. Show me the evidence. And it's like, great, cool. These are all really great explanations. Bigfoot could just be like, an unknown form of, like North
Gigantopithecus,
right? Yeah, or orang pendek or something like that. Okay, cool, great. Then why does it do all these other things? Why does it only come up in certain circumstances? Why don't we see these more often? You'd think in this day and age with the sheer amount of technology that we're drowning in, we'd be seeing more reports of it. And it's then the explanation is, well, we don't have the time, the effort, blah 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 blah, and it's like, well, sure, right? These are all things that can kind of get you so far. Not to set up a straw man. That's not my goal here. My goal is, I think, we've sort of within the last few hundred years have been thrust into a Hegelian nightmare, where our boy Hegel, who was a German philosopher in the school of German idealism. Which you could probably, is an easier way to understand it, is ideaism, that really all these things, they can just be explained with logic and reason. And so you then take these things that are mystical experiences, essentially, and sort of bring them into our own two-dimensional reality and flatten them out and say, well, this isn't, any sort of experience you're having. This is just, an orca that you're seeing. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the thing is, these experiences elicit a response from people, typically in the form of some sort of, fear or peace or whatever, depending on who you are and what you bring to the experience, right? It's like, you could have a similar reaction to seeing just a deer in the wilderness, right? All these things have visceral sort of reactions that we have to these experiences. And these scientific materialism can only get you so far. It can answer a couple of questions, and then the rest is kind of like, well, we don't know that yet because we can't. We're kind of like shooting ourselves in the foot by not being able to repeat any of this. because the scientific method relies on repeatability, and there is no repeatability. All we really have is just a set of assumptions based on, some science that's even being changed every day, and it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, well, all these explanations can get you to a certain point, but at the end of the day, all these experiences and all these things, it's like you take a picture of something, a grainy photograph of a beautiful tree, and you have this grainy photograph, and you look at it years later, and you're like, well, I don't know what this is anymore, so I'm just going to make up a new word for it, and we're just going to say it's this, 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 and this, when you kind of lose the point of what it was in the first place. What's more real, the grainy photograph or the tree itself? You see where I'm going with this?
I think so, yeah.
So essentially, the whole thing is, all of these experiences are not new in human history. None of it is. These are all things that, as you said yourself, in the 13th century, people were experiencing these same events. And sure, it could have been an orca, it could have been an eel. But the thing is, it was an experience that these people had. And the fact that it continues to this day, and the setting may have changed, but the experience is still the same. We'll never know the essence of the experience, but what we do know is people are still experiencing it. And no matter how we try to put new terms on it, it still doesn't define the experience.
Well, true, we interpret it culturally. But I'm glad you brought up the orang pendek, because that was one of our opening questions. Now, next month's trip to search for the orang pendek will not be Richard Freeman's first jaunt to Sumatra. And he talked about this on one of the shows previously. The orang pendek is a small Bigfoot-like creature, kind of an oxymoron there, that supposedly lives in the mountains and forests of the large Indonesian island of Sumatra. Many local people claim to have seen it, and Richard Freeman believes he has heard it. Quote, it has also been seen by Dutch colonists, Western researchers, and travelers. I've seen tracks of the orang pendek and heard it calling, Richard told us. I've spoken with many people who've seen it. My good friend Dave Archer and a native guide both saw the orang pendek in 2009 from about 100 feet. That's actually pretty close. It was frightened. Well, all right. Unquote. In the Bahasa Indonesian language, orang pendek literally means short man or dwarf. As a matter of fact, that when it was it and there was another creature whose fossils were discovered, it was considered, known as the Hobbit. All right. Now the fossil remains were of a very small race of people, apparently in an area of Southeast Asia, and could be ancestors of the orang pendek. I don't know. It hasn't been decided yet. And Richard continues, they are solitary creatures, and he said he also has hair samples. Quote, as a zoologist, I can say that its tracks are different from apes. As for the hair, this has been analyzed by different labs. Dr. Lars Thomas at the University of Copenhagen has concluded that it's related to the orangutan, but distinct from it, Richard stated. I have no doubt the orang pendek exists. Hopefully next month he can find it. So, as far as some of the other subjects we were going to talk about him, Richard, was the Mongolian death worm.
Ah, a classic.
Okay. It is a classic, and he thought, of course, and he's actually been to the Gobi Desert, running around talking to the natives, and they actually were terrified of it. And they would describe it as sending out a huge electrical charge that could kill people. And
I think we actually asked him about it last time he was on the show.
We did, yes. And he was saying that people really believe in it. Now here we are in our book talking about that, and we're quoting Richard Freeman again. And we asked him, what's the weirdest cryptid you've ever hunted? And it was this Mongolian death worm. Quote, by the time these stories from the Gobi Desert nomads reach the West, they've grown into a creature worthy of doing battle with Doctor Who. It's 2 to 5 feet long, doesn't sound that huge, red, and can spit a corrosive acid. They can generate blasts of electricity that can kill a full-grown camel or human, unquote. Now, Richard said that he traveled over 1,000 miles through the Gobi Desert and a 500,000 square mile wilderness area shared by China and Mongolia. And he interviewed nomads who claimed to have seen the death worm. And we have an illustration of it in our book. I don't know if it's accurate or not.
Well, it's as accurate as it can be.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Well, Richard said it's a different animal altogether. The electricity, or throwing lightning as they call it, is complete folklore. I'm sure. Well, I hope so. Most people describe a creature usually around 2 feet long, as thick as a human arm. It's seen in the desert or slithering in and out of holes. People are absolutely terrified of it. They believe it's highly venomous and can spit. That sounds like some cobras. Richard talked about a particularly interesting man who had seen the death worm as a child. And Richard says, quote, his whole family took their livestock and their yurt and moved out of the area. They were frightened to death, unquote. Richard suggests that the death worm might be a reptile of some kind, not a true worm. Quote, the Gobi is a very strange desert. It's not like the Sahara. Some of it is sand, much of it is rock. Some of it looks like the surface of Mars or Mordor. I don't know, even he's been to Mordor. Other parts are like a huge mirror, shiny and flat, and there are all sorts of mirages, he says. The death worm certainly could be an undiscovered species of sand boa or burrowing worm lizard. Again, the guy's a zoologist. But I think the spitted poison is apocryphal. Several similar stories are told about a species of sand boa in Somalia. Touch it and fall dead, they say. It's actually harmless. So anyway, Richard compares the folk beliefs about the death worm to the fear of salamanders and basilisks in medieval Europe. Much as you said, these things were experienced by just about everybody over the centuries in one form or another, and there you have it.
Well, it's always really interesting to see how sort of older cultures kind of deal with these things, and it's always kind of funny. I always liked watching documentaries because I watched one on a ring pendant years ago, and it was fun because the researchers show up, they have their get-ups on, they're ready to go on safari, and they show up to these these tiny little villages, and people are like, yeah, I wouldn't go after it, and they're like, oh, silly little natives, they don't understand science. And they run off into the wilderness, to go look for the thing. And it's interesting because it's almost like, well, they don't know what they're talking about. This could be just a different kind of monkey. And it's like, well, I think they know what monkeys look like.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they're not as dumb as we think they are.
Absolutely not. They wouldn't have survived.
Right.
If primitive people were dumb, they wouldn't survive.
No, and that's we have this fun thing here in the modern world where we think we know everything, and we really don't, and
we don't know much of anything.
No,
everything you know is wrong.
Exactly.
Motto of the show.
We have a motto, ladies and gentlemen. I do appreciate his I do appreciate Richard's approach to everything because he does talk to the natives. And he gets the backstory, and he sort of, I always liked how he dealt with the folklore of it, where he didn't dismiss it. He kind of took it into consideration. I really appreciated that about his research, because honestly, I think folklore at the end of the day is kind of all we really have left, of these things and of these things that people experienced. And yeah, sure, it can kind of get, out of hand.
Well, people think that mythology is fake. It's just stories that are made up. Mythology is well, as we always say, mythology and folklore are the vessels of the memory of the human species,
or they're stories that we participate in.
Yes,
there's many different meanings to it, but it's like you hear myth and you think, oh well, it's just not true.
Yeah, that's not true.
Right.
So there are ways. And then people we do now what people did then. And we may have the veneer of science on it, but we interpret things according to our own still very narrow paradigm.
Right, but yet, you'll see, you're like, yeah, sure, we understand all these things, blah, 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 but then when it happens to you, you freak out, and you're like, it has to be this. And,
right.
And all science goes out the window.
Well, yeah, in a way, yeah, but as our friend Mark Antonio says, we're dealing with probably undiscovered science.
Oh no, what I'm saying is it's science is supposed to be facts, right?
Yeah, when it happens to you, it's a little different.
Right. So it's we've sort of lost this whole thing. The Greeks had a bunch of different words for knowledge. One of them being episteme, meaning scientific knowledge, techne being technical knowledge. The difference between the two, technical being like, I can construct a pen, whereas ecumene, I understand how the pen comes together, I understand the ink and where it comes from. But there is also doxa, which is the knowledge of public opinion, which is how one interprets this knowledge. And that's the thing that we all forget, is that science, yeah, sure, we have facts, but it needs to be interpreted. And interpretation is opinion.
Right.
And based on experience. So, at the end of the day, sure, we have the science, but it has to be interpreted.
Well, that's a question that we've talked with Richard about in previous shows. What constitutes evidence?
Right.
And according to whose paradigm and what ethos, and what kind of knowledge, what kind of epistemology.
Right, exactly. So that's the thing, is when it comes down to it, we still try to string things together as stories because we as humans order reality in 4 different ways: language, music, art, and ritual. And so we use language to try and order it and make sense of it, and so we tell stories in order to understand it. And so, even then, analogy is a great way of understanding things that we just don't get, because like is to like and this is to this. So Bigfoot, instead of it being some unknown mystical creature, well, it acts like an ape, therefore it might be. And so,
looks like a duck and talks like a duck.
Right, but we still tell stories about it. And these data points that we use to construct a narrative to make sense of the phenomena.
Well, one of the wrinkles in this argument, too, and one of the things that Richard specializes in, is there are creatures who were well known, but were thought to be extinct, but might not be. Again, we can get back into the whole argument about we don't really know our own planet, and the places where they could survive. You have the coelacanth, that fish from Precambrian, for heaven's sake, thought to be extinct for hundreds of millions of years, and there it was in the Indian Ocean, and they still find them now and then. Matter of fact, one of our distant relatives identified it by the name of Courtney, Australian zoologist. So I'm going to be writing about that in the next family newsletter.
Oh, very cool.
So all the way down to really strange things like the supposedly existing Mokali Mbembe in Africa, which is essentially a sauropod dinosaur. Natives will talk about it like it's that some have seen it. Richard has been there, and we talked about that. But again, areas of Africa that are not completely inaccessible, but hard to get to, if not geographically, but because of warring countries across boundaries and this sort of thing. Yeah, you have to be very careful of that. So there's a lot of places you can't go. Yeah. So Richard has done a lot of work in researching the Tasmanian wolf, this sort of thing, things that were believed to be extinct, but all of a sudden they turn up. So this is another realm of cryptozoology where science can come together with cryptozoologists and perhaps agree that a species was not extinct after all. And that's always good news.
Considering you're hearing more and more about extinctions.
Well, I mean, a lot of them, I don't know, the balance of nature is off somehow in many areas. For example, the buffalo in America was considered on the verge of extinction when I was down there in the 1960s in the Southwest. And, there were, I don't know, a few hundred in existence. Now they've spread to the point where there are, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And they have to kill some of them off. I actually had a buffalo burger.
Oh, nice.
Not that I favored, killing animals, but I mean, just, they came back. The California condor is supposedly extinct. It's either the Andean or the California condor. I think they believe that they supposedly are. Some have been seen, this sort of thing. Which, of course, we don't have really much time to get into. Another thing I wanted to get into with Richard were the Thunderbird stories. Very large birds that are seen pretty much all over the world. Now, we got into that with Linda Godfrey, the great American cryptozoological researcher who has a similar journalism background to my own, and who broke the story of the Beast of Bray Road.
Yes.
In Wisconsin. And she had researched a number of Thunderbird stories. One was in the Pacific Northwest, and she said the man she interviewed was describing a huge bird. He was riding a bicycle. He was on vacation. And he stopped just to take a breath. He looked to the right, and there was an enormous bird, like 10 feet tall, staring at him from the middle of the field. All of a sudden, this enormous wingspan, and it started to flap and flew away. He could feel the wind, and as it flew away, it kind of flew down the road above it, and he said the wingspan spanned the entire road, which was about 30 to 40 feet wide.
Jeez.
So Linda said she interviewed it, didn't see it herself, but one thing that she does that we do is to look at the history of the area. Sure enough, there was a bird island in the nearby river, and the First Nations and the people in the area had believed in a large bird of that kind that had nested on that island. And they would have hatchlings, things of this kind. So here's another connection between the modern era and ancient legend, because as we always say, ancient legend isn't just legend. I mean, it's based on something that people experienced when, somehow, whatever. And these are often in cave paintings or petroglyphs, this sort of thing. So it's the same mysteries confronting the human race all along. And it's people like Richard Freeman who essentially have pursued that from a feet-on-the-ground position. And we really respect him, and we hope he can join us very soon on some show. And as I say, we hope he's okay.
Yes, indeed.
I'd love to talk to him after he goes back to Sumatra and looks for the Orang Pendek.
Yeah, no, that should be really interesting. And I think it's important to remember these stories because it's important. It's important to know where you came from, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. Well,
I often say that we're the ones living in the false world.
Yeah,
we live in artificial environments, separated from the earth. We don't know what the heck is going on. We have created artificial survival techniques, this sort of thing. Whereas the people who live that we consider primitive are actually the ones who have their fingers on the pulse of reality, I think, more. And regardless of the stories that they pass down to us about these creatures, the experience is the same and very, very, very legitimate, I think.
Yeah.
So there we have it.
Yeah.
Well, we have moved to our announcement period here. Ben, if you would take it away.
Sure thing. And we start off with the Exeter Ufo Festival. It's returning in September at the historic Exeter, New Hampshire Town Hall over Labor Day weekend. That's September 3rd and 4th. This is a great event. The whole town gets involved. It's sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to benefit local children's charities. Along with ourselves, speakers will include Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, Mike Stevens, Lynn Nickerson, Valerie Lofaso, and Mac Maloney, among others. And the subject of our talk is time storms, with thanks to the great British researcher Jenny Randalls, who coined the term. We plan to do our traditional live broadcast from the event on Sunday with a panel of the speakers. This is a very fun event, so join us if you can. You can visit ExeterUFOFestival.org for more details.
Visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON AM and FM, including many that have been restored in the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com. Just click the archives link. Also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Okay.
And you can also check out our show website. That has a charity page on it as well, with links to several good causes we have adopted over the years, including Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and most recently, the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund.
And you can get our app there, too, for your phone. So, Ben, what's in the Foot Locker for next week?
Well, we have coming up next week, July 24th, we'll welcome back the experiencer and UFO great Matt Moniz to talk about surviving alien abduction.
And welcome back, I hope. Okay. We leave you today with a thought from that old sweetheart, the 13th century philosopher and theologian Rumi. Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.